For this round is on mainstreaming nature-based solutions. We have three of us here today from the Naturvation Research Project, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about our research on mainstreaming. We'll first go around and introduce ourselves and talk about the approach that we've taken to think about how mainstreaming of nature-based solutions happens in cities. And then we're going to spend a little bit more time questioning each other and talking about some of the research and findings that we've worked on specifically. So to start with, to introduce myself, I'm Laura Tozer. I'm a postdoctoral research associate with Durham University in the UK. In a few months, I'll be starting as an assistant professor at the University of Toronto in Canada. And in general, my research is about the politics and the policies driving transitions toward resilient and carbon neutral cities. My work with Naturvation has been about, as part of the team looking at how to mainstream nature-based solutions in cities. We've done some work comparing experiences in European cases, Sweden, Germany, the Netherlands, Spain, the EU more broadly. And we have looked across these different places to try to understand how nature-based solutions are challenged in their implementation and how we can overcome that to mainstream them. And I wanted to spend a moment here before I pass it off to my colleagues to introduce themselves to give you a bit of insight into the way that we've thought about what mainstreaming is and how it happens. Our approach to mainstreaming, you may think about mainstreaming as the integration of a topic into existing policy. In many cases, this is often the way that mainstreaming is used. So you have a whole bunch of agricultural policy, and you're going to integrate addressing climate change impacts into your existing agricultural policy suite. And we're thinking about mainstreaming in a little bit of a different way. We're trying to understand how we can weave nature-based solutions into the way that things are done, so that it's automatic, so that it's standard practice in the development and the maintenance of cities. And what we think about is how weaving it into to make it a new normal depends as much on undoing things about the city as it depends on doing things differently. A lot of the challenge to mainstreaming new innovations like nature-based solutions are related to the embeddedness of existing technologies or ways of governing cities or behavior of people in cities. And so what we think about is how do nature-based solutions deviate from these established practices of planning and designing urban infrastructures, and what would we need to change in order for nature-based solutions to become standard operating procedure in a city. And so what we're interested in doing that is trying to understand how to increase the uptake of nature-based solutions in cities. So I just wanted to give that quick introduction to the way that we've thought about it a little bit more broadly across the project and pass it off to my colleagues to introduce themselves and to contribute to see if they have anything to add about the mainstreaming approach. So I'll pass it off to you, Xander, to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Sander van de Jacht and I work as a postdoctoral researcher at Utrecht University on this Naturvation project, and also since recently at Wageningen University in a similar role. I will just briefly give my perspective on mainstreaming, which has developed through the work we've been doing on the Naturvation project in this area. I think I learned from this that mainstreaming is really a very complex challenge, especially if we're talking about mainstreaming in urban contexts. Essentially involves engagement of a broad range of actors, and not just the government actors that we tend to speak to a lot in these kind of projects, but also actors in the sectors of urban development and finance, where we also had a discussion on in the previous session. And it's not just simply involving and engaging them. It's also to do with changing sometimes very dominant logics around sort of the city as a marketplace, which can be quite challenging to do. And there's also lots of vested interests in the city associated with urban services that are competing with nature-based solutions for space, such as roads or also pipelines and housing, of course, which is a huge challenge in many cities. So I think we have to be engaging lots of people, but also take a very context sensitive and patient approach in many ways, and pick carefully which actions we want to prioritize. then I'm handing over to Linjian to ask her the same question. What's your idea about mainstreaming NBS in cities?
So hello, everyone. Just also briefly introduce myself. I'm Lin Jinxie. I'm also a postdoctoral researcher from the Durham University working on the Naturvation project. And my work within the Naturvation and together with the other colleagues is mainly on exploring how nature-based solutions contribute to urban sustainability governance, and especially on biodiversity and climate change. And so same with Sandra and Laura. I'm also part of my work is devoted to understand how nature-based solutions can be mainstreamed to address like urban climate and biodiversity challenges. And in terms of my understanding of mainstreaming, I think Laura and Sandra have already summarized the key information argument that we make throughout the project. And if there's a thing that I would like to add or highlight is that when we talk about mainstreaming nature-based solutions or to normalize it in our way of thinking, doing, and organizing the urban development and management, I think it is important to remember that it is not only the physical development or physical construction or etc. that we need to intervene, but also how we think about nature and how we think about urban development or the relationship between the nature and human is also a key part when we talk about mainstreaming nature-based solutions. And we have kind of like already introduced a little bit our approach of mainstreaming, and I have a question for Laura. Maybe you can explain or tell us a little bit more about how can we mainstream nature-based solutions into the urban development in cities?
Yeah, sure. One of the areas of work that we focused on was to try to talk to people who were involved in the design, construction, maintenance, the construction of the city, and infrastructure and housing in particular. And we learned from this sector that there are quite a few challenges that are holding back nature-based solutions from mainstream deployment. And so these are things like nature-based solutions address multiple challenges at once. And so there's no primary stakeholder in the development or construction or even often cases planning that is responsible for nature-based solutions. And so it falls between the cracks of different kinds of silos. And the benefits of nature-based solutions are split across the silos as well. So it makes it hard for nature-based solutions to compete with gray sustainability solutions. It's hard to demonstrate the benefits since they're split across these different areas. On top of that, technological and gray infrastructure solutions to urban challenges are often preferred over nature ones. And these approaches are reinforced through practices that prioritize things like quantitative data or different kinds of expertise. At the same time, within this sector, this urban development sector, there are knowledge gaps about nature-based solutions that lead to some skepticism about the effectiveness and dependability of nature-based solutions as a sustainability solution. And at the same time, a lot of people who were trying to expand the uptake of nature-based solutions in the development sector saw that there was a lack of policy that was requiring it to happen. So there was a real barrier there. Oftentimes there was concerns about the costs for nature-based solutions as well. And a lot of this related to concerns about the uncertainty about the costs for a nature-based solution project, as well as unfamiliarity with the risk. There was a focus on short-term payback in urban infrastructure development as well, and some difficulties figuring out who is going to be responsible to maintain and keep up nature-based solutions. And so I'm bringing up all these challenges that are holding back nature-based solutions from mainstream deployment, because a lot of when we think about trying to increase uptake and mainstream nature-based solutions into standard practice, we have to think about how we can overcome challenges like these ones that relate to the urban development sector. And I think the important thing here is that increased uptake of urban nature-based solutions won't be possible without addressing some of these barriers in the urban development, the construction and the maintenance domain, across the entire value chain that's involved in planning, designing, constructing, maintaining, operating cities. one of the things that we found was that mainstreaming can be advanced by collaborative learning opportunities. This is a way to connect some of those disconnected silos and to fill some of the knowledge gaps about nature-based solutions. Often the perceived knowledge gaps actually stemmed from a lack of integration across different kinds of disciplines and a lack of familiarity with what another discipline might know. So, you know, an architect, a planner, ecologist, a highway engineer, they have different kinds of expertise and that are all related to nature-based solutions, but aren't necessarily connected. And so we found in our research that collaborative learning opportunities like pilot projects or co-funding between public and private sector that cause these sectors to work together, and even formal collaboration processes that changed the procedures about who had to work together when. All of these different collaborative learning opportunities worked towards increasing the uptake and mainstreaming nature-based solutions. We also found this preference for technological and gray infrastructure solutions was hard to overcome. So many things are oriented towards that as the status quo. And there were a lot of references for needing more quantified evidence on nature-based solution impact in our research. And while this can be really powerful at particular stages of development, we also found that when it comes to mainstreaming nature-based solutions into urban development, there's a need to think about how to incorporate an increased recognition of some of the flexibility in nature-based solutions. And it's important to find a way to accommodate the increased uncertainty inherent in how nature is going to operate to solve this challenge, and trying to change knowledge practices to accommodate that as well. And then a lot of the findings from some of the work that we did related to try to talk about how we can increase demand for nature-based solutions. And we found that positioning nature-based solutions as a high-quality green space, things like integrating it into building certifications, trying to build on the desire for a green reputation among commercial building owners, for example, all of these different ways of driving demand were a way of trying to increase the integration of nature-based solutions into cities. And I just wanted to kind of end this little spiel by talking about one of the solutions that people working on urban development found. They found that they had a lot of success increasing the uptake of nature-based solutions by linking it to another policy priority. So when we talked to urban development stakeholders that were trying to champion nature-based solutions, they found success when they positioned nature-based solutions as an ecosystem services solution or a circular economy solution or a climate change solution, linking it to a related policy paradigm. In particular, linking it to climate change was a strategy, particularly in places where there had been climate change impacts. So that's an introduction to some of our findings about, especially about this kind of construction development sector that we did a lot of work in. And I wondered if there's any other kind of follow-up questions that I can respond to about that.
Well, I think so far our audience are still digesting the information that you're just sharing.
No problem. I do have one example, if that would be, I could talk a little bit more about a time that a collaborative learning happened.
That would be great.
I think we have to move on to the next question.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, in terms of the time available.
No problem. Yeah, you're right. We have been moving along here. So let me bring a question for you, Sander, and to ask, what could the role of the government be in mainstreaming urban nature-based solutions?
Thank you very much, Laura. Yeah, so my research mainly looked at the role of what we called in this project the regulatory domain. By that we mean the government and different levels of government, from the city to the regional to the national to the transnational. But also sort of the role of the policy advisory organizations and knowledge institutions and lobby organizations as well in the mainstreaming of urban nature-based solutions. And this research revealed a lot of different instruments that are currently being used by actors in this domain. And among the sort of more powerful ones that I wish to highlight are first of all, they play a very important role in legitimizing. So by writing about the concept of nature-based solutions, they actually can begin to create a discourse and an understanding of nature as a multifunctional intervention, which is not necessarily something that a lot of urban actors are aware of at the moment. In addition, at the financial side, they also we found that they actually often fund or co-fund many of the nature-based solutions, and they do so through subsidies such as green roof subsidies, which we found in multiple cities, grants and co-funding, but also, of course, capital investment. So basically, they own a lot of land, and they have the opportunity to create nature-based solutions on their own land. And then they also, but there's perhaps something more at a higher level of government, they can provide certain tax breaks for to reward investment in nature-based solutions, such as green roofs or sustainable urban drainage. Because currently there's often a tax punishment because your house increases in property value or your property increases in value, you end up paying more tax. And that's not that's disincentivizes investment in nature-based solution in a way. Additional approaches include providing a mandate. I think that's also something we saw in a lot of countries and cities. So we've already been discussing the green space factor, but also in the UK, the biodiversity net gain regulation that forces developers to invest in green space as part of new development for biodiversity gains. We found examples of actors in this domain investing in new partnerships, in new experiments, bringing different societal actors together, and there's many good examples we can share on that. For example, working not just on new ideas but also on new business models. New governance approaches for nature-based solutions. Then a very primary task is, of course, the data collection, the inventories cities have and develop, the monitoring they do of nature in cities. That can then inform the right type of action at the right place or in the right place. I could probably go on, but in the interest of time, I'll just say that the takeaways from this is that in the end, there's not just one recommendation that we can give to cities. It's about combining different types of instruments, varying from the regulatory to the voluntary to the financial. But also, I think we found that, or an important finding is that it's not realistic for every city to go through all of these actions on its own. And we can do a lot of coordination and strategic development of these actions. And so, for example, things like assessment frameworks or thinking about innovative business models are not things that each city has to do individually. This could be done perhaps at higher levels of government, and it's important to share knowledge about the practices that work and perhaps do not work. But then at the city level, I think actions like engaging with citizens, building those connections between different policy domains and with potential investors are some of the actions that need to be prioritized. But it also, of course, then depends on what cities are already doing and where the governance challenges are. So I think, we do provide recommendations, but it's not to say that each and every city government has to prioritize those, and there needs to be some strategic thinking about what is important, taking into account place-specific dynamics. I think that I'll stop there. Are there any questions?
You actually are just answered the one that I was going to pose to you from the chat about the differences in governance level, local and regional, and their ability to mainstream nature-based solutions. So
so they have different roles, and I think we see potential roles for all levels. I think national government putting it on the agenda, creating some grant instruments or other support mechanisms. At the regional level, sort of perhaps more knowledge exchange if they happen to have similar socio-cultural dynamics, similar weather-related phenomena. I think in that level, there's also a lot of scope for knowledge exchange. And at the local level, then the more direct engagement with the stakeholders, co-investing and co-developing and co-managing and maintaining those green spaces.
Great, thank you. And we better make sure we have some time for Lin Jun here as well.
Yeah, so thank you. Lin Jun, I have a question for you. How may nature-based solutions be mainstreamed to address climate change and biodiversity challenges?
Yep, thank you, Sander. I can see that all the questions coming in, so I will try to be as brief as I can, so can leave some time for us to answering some questions. So yeah, climate change and biodiversity loss are two prominent challenges faced by cities today. And as we have already heard in previous talks in today's conference, that nature-based solutions are increasingly being endorsed as viable solutions for climate change and for biodiversity. But however, it is to be noted that although nature-based solutions are featured for its multifunctionality, it does not spontaneously address both challenges at the same time. So, for example, we have solutions for climate change to, do urban afforestation. But if we planting those monoculture species trees, that does no good or even harm the local biodiversity. And that can be, maybe you have addressed climate change, but at the same time, you are exacerbating the biodiversity crisis that we have today. So what I want to highlight is that from our study is that for different sustainability challenges, the key stepping stones or the levers for mainstreaming could be different. So for example, for climate change, we know that it is relatively well established in cities as a prominent agenda. So the approach or the methods to mainstream nature-based solutions for climate change can be quite straightforward, highlighting the potentials and cost effectiveness, and so as to align this with the climate actions that cities have and to access funds and resources dedicated for climate change. But comparing to climate change, that biodiversity is relatively still marginalized in cities. So one key measure that we find from our analysis is that, like Sander has mentioned, that the biodiversity no net loss or even net gain regulation is a key interventional measure that cities can adopt to promote the mainstreaming of nature-based solutions for biodiversity. And so as you can see that there are different approaches, like for climate change, we can also list like engaging the insurance sectors, and for biodiversity, maybe piggybacking on the more prioritized agenda like climate change. But what we are arguing is that if we want to address climate change and biodiversity challenges at the same time through the nature-based solutions, because right now it is kind of the consensus that climate change and biodiversity issues are closely intertwined and need to be addressed together. So to do that, we need to build on those common stepping stones or or those key interventions that can help both agendas at the same time. And yeah, I think that's pretty much I want to share or highlight it from that part of study that we have done through the Naturvation project. And I pick up a follow-up question for Laura. And here is the question about what kind of like capacities are needed to mainstream nature-based solutions in urban planning and development.
Sorry about that. I was muted. A good question. There are some really key capacities that are needed in different sectors. I think one of the ones that's really important is to try to find ways to work across some of the disciplinary silos. A lot of the nature-specific expertise comes in towards the end of a planning process, towards the end of a development process. So one of the things that our work came across was in cases where institutionally they had set up ways of having cross-disciplinary interaction early in planning processes, or they had reorganized departments so that nature expertise was more regularly in contact with others. Those were cases where the benefits of nature-based solutions were easier for the planners and developers to understand.
Maybe if I can come in with a question for Lin-Jun. I mean, it's not specifically to you, Lin-Jun, but maybe you want to try to answer this one. The question is how to mainstream nature-based solutions in contexts that do not prioritize nature. So which are sort of more focused on gray infrastructure development.
Sorry, just checking. Oh yeah, I'm on. So okay, yeah, I think it's a good question because often it is the case that nature is not really prioritized or valued by the policymakers or planners, and I think I also mentioned briefly in previous introduction is that one key thing or one measure that we could do is to try to piggybacking the nature-based solutions or piggybacking the other agendas like biodiversity into those existing prioritized agendas in cities. Like for example, in Germany, that energy transition is a hot topic. And if we can kind of like showcasing the nature's benefits on this agenda, then that can be an opportunity to mainstream nature-based solutions in the thinking and doing of urban development and management. So yeah, I think also I can see that we have only last minute here, and I would like to direct our audiences to some of the key findings or materials we have coming out from the project. Let me see if I can share the screen. Okay, it's here. Sorry about this. This is the broadcasting of us, and then it's here. Yeah. So on our Naturvation website, we have this section called Mainstream, and right now we have already put on some findings or reports about the pathways that we suggest for mainstreaming nature-based solutions for urban sustainability agendas, including climate change, biodiversity, economic regeneration, social inclusion, and urban sustainability goals in general. And also we have the key stepping stones that we argued earlier, that the key interventions or measures that we can, put pressure on to catalyze the mainstreaming. So you can find out more information here through our website. I will also copy the link to our checkbox. I will stop share here.
I think that wraps us up for this Meet the Experts session. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And I believe we have the final plenary next, which will be fantastic. And so I'll look forward to seeing everyone there.
Thank you.